Welcome back. So, the biggest video I've done on this channel in months is the one where I talked about my ongoing disappointment with AEW. AEW's picked up their game since then, but I have a problem. And I'm going to go back. So, every now and then I'll get asked, like, well, do you watch UFC? You watch WWE? Do you watch UFC? No, because I always felt like I had to make a choice. So, I would watch a UFC event, and I'd watch these guys just beat the hell out of each other. And then I would try to watch pro wrestling and I couldn't because all I could see was all the openings wrestlers weren't taking. All I could think was, okay, you could execute a single leg takedown right here and put the guy in a choke if you wanted to. Like I couldn't watch something that is performative and predetermined after watching UFC. I couldn't do it. So I had to make up my mind. Did I want to watch UFC or did I want to watch pro wrestling? I opted for pro wrestling, and it took about a month for me to stop seeing all of those openings that bothered my brain so much. But AEW has done something similar in recent months. So I talked about the ridiculousness of the flamethrower, right? And sure enough, a wrestler gets burned and it could have been a lot worse than what it was. There are, I mean, Edge is out for however long because of that silly dive he took off the top of a cage. That really, it's these dangerous things wrestlers do when they're left to their own devices that makes it tough for me to watch because at this stage of life, I've seen so many wrestlers have shortened careers. I've watched enough episodes of Dark Side of the Ring to know when I'm watching some of these AEW wrestlers and what they're doing that someday at least one of them, maybe a couple, may end up becoming cautionary tales on Dark Side of the Ring. And with the most recent pay per view, you had the Chicago street fight. I'm okay with street fights. Street fights are, it's no rules. I'm kind of tired of the thumbtacks. It feels like the thumbtacks get rolled out way too often now. They don't have an impact for me anymore. It's just kind of a, all right, here we go, more thumbtacks is how I react when I see them in a match. I don't really care, and that's not great. That's not great. And that's an issue. But the issue that I have is so okay. You have the BCC turn against Brian Danielson. Fine, fine, heel turn. They choke him out. Fine. They put a plastic bag over his head, which to me qualifies almost as attempted unaliving of somebody, because I don't want to use the actual word. But that's how it came across, and so to me, I was like, okay, so they'd have to get suspended or something, right? Nope. No. The face of the company gets suffocated with a plastic bag. Yeah, that happened. All right, we're moving on. And then you have ultra violence between Swerve and Adam Page, which is completely earned. That feud's been going on for a long time, but the way that match ended too, it's like, really? So like if you get away with this, why wouldn't you just keep doing it? So like for instance on this week's episode, when the BCC isn't choking anybody else out with a plastic bag, I'm thinking, okay, so that's just for Brian Danielson, and you could tell that while they're attacking guys, they're still being smart and they're being careful about it, which is perfectly fine. But when you've elevated their violence level on a pay per view to then bring it back down the following week on Dynamite, I found it a little jarring on some level. I don't know. And then there's the fact that yes, there's long term storytelling. They have that going on, but the ultra violence and the spot fests that we see, I'm not a big fan of. I'm not even a fan of that in WWE. It drives me nuts when I see wrestlers getting ready for a spot where the guys who are supposed to be hurt are like all congregating, and it's like, okay, and all the companies do this now. Everybody just gets together because they got to catch this guy coming off the top rope, and it's really obvious that they have to catch the guy, and that they've set themselves up to catch the wrestler jumping off the top rope, and it takes you out of it. So it's almost the same as that effect of watching UFC and then trying to watch pro wrestling and going, I can't do this because I can tell they're not actually trying to fight. They're not actually trying to win. They're just out there doing this dance back and forth, this choreographed setup, and it's hard not to see it. So for me, when I see like the ultra violence at a pay per view, it makes it more difficult for me to care about what's going on during a weekly episode. So that's the drawback too. And I'm old enough too to remember that everybody remembers the ECW chants and how big like ECW this and that was. Hardcore matches, when they're done right, can be really, really good. When a hardcore match is not done to that level, it can be some of the worst wrestling you're ever going to see. And where it gets tricky is there are definitely wrestlers who have used that hardcore, I don't need rules, to get around the fact that they aren't very strong wrestlers. And for ECW, I think that was part of it back in the day, was these guys weren't as classically trained. Some of them weren't really great technicians, which when ECW went under, that became kind of a known thing. Some of them had really solid careers afterwards. Rob Van Dam comes to mind as one who had a really good career after ECW was done. But there were plenty too that once they were in a WWE ring, or in some cases they went to WCW before that folded, and you could tell they couldn't really wrestle all that well. And I do have that in the back of my head sometimes with AEW, where it feels like, okay, this over the top bit that they're doing is to cover up for the fact that this one wrestler can't wrestle as well as this guy can, and so it kind of, I don't know, it kind of falls apart for me. I love MJF. I think everything MJF does is really good. I think Will Ospreay has unlimited potential, and I think if AEW can get things squared away, the first thing they have to do is get that belt off Mercedes Moné and start building her up properly. They've not built her up properly, and I think it's hurting. Like the whole Camille storyline where she's got the bodyguard, fine. That's been done. It's a wrestling trope. It's been done many times over. Obviously, at some point in time, Camille's going to turn against her, or vice versa. I don't know that Camille would work as a face, though, and I know at this point the fans won't buy Mercedes as a face, so I'm not sure where you go with that. Um, Tony's been good about staying off camera. I think that's been the right call. The problem's been that you get the EVPs going on this power trip, and you have Jack Perry on this power trip too, and then it just kind of petered out. Like it's not really as much of a storyline as what I think they were intending it to be. Maybe it's because it didn't resonate that much with viewers. Maybe because the ratings didn't come up that much, that they didn't continue what was clearly going to be an NWO style storyline. But yeah, it doesn't feel like that's a thing now, and it's just kind of run its course. So that's how I feel about current AEW product. WWE, I think, has been hitting it out of the park. All the stuff with the Terror Twins. The only thing that's been amiss for me has been the wrong person's leading the bloodline. That is the only thing that is standing out. And now apparently this is a rumor too that they're realizing that Solo Sikoa can't really lead the group. He doesn't have that it factor. And I think part of it is he didn't really get built up to have that it factor. He's the big Samoan, he's related to Roman. They bring him in and have him join the group, and then he becomes the leader. And I don't feel like it was earned the way that the head of the table was earned by Roman. And I really thought they were going to make it so that The Rock was the actual head of the table, and that basically Solo was like the henchman, the guy who was going out and doing the bidding of The Rock. Maybe eventually they circle back and make it that way, but I think Jacob Fatu is the guy. I think he's the guy. Jacob Fatu works really, really well. What I like with Jacob is that his moves have real impact, but you can tell he knows what he's doing, and that he's not actually injuring people. So that's the trick, is to make it look as devastating as possible, and still you can tell if you've watched wrestling for a long time that they're still taking care of their opponent, and they're doing it in a way that's brutal but safe at the same time, which Rhea Ripley's become very good at on the women's side as well. Um, Outside of that, I'm not sure what they're doing with Michin. I don't think it's resonating. I think Michin's been buried for too many years for them to make her suddenly a contender for the belt and make it work. But that's the thing with WWE. There's little quibbles I have with the storylines they have going on, but in general, I understand what they're doing and where they're going with it, and I agree with a lot of the storylines they're running. I absolutely do, which has been for me, anyways, the difference between my viewing experience watching AEW and watching WWE. They're one of the companies I say, you know what? Yep, no, I agree with this. This is absolutely yep. This is the right move. And in the other, I'm saying I don't know. I don't know where this is going. And there's some good feuds. There's some really good wrestlers there. But I still feel like with AEW, and word has it too that once the new TV deal is announced, which should be this week apparently, that there's going to be another new show, another hour of TV broadcasting. Hopefully they can make it work because Collision just hasn't resonated any more than Rampage did. So adding another show that fans may not care about would be a problem. So hopefully they figure this out in a way that is going to make it work. I don't know that you necessarily need to do a roster split, but I think we're getting close to that. There's just way too many wrestlers in AEW. There's way too many. I could have an entire board made up of wrestlers that are either not being used, in some cases wrestlers big names that are injured, and just wrestlers that I feel like should probably be higher on the card than where they are. But that's just one man's opinion. So that's why I haven't been doing a lot of videos on wrestling lately. I don't feel like there's been a whole lot more for me to add from where I was. I think AEW's product has gotten better, but the ultra violent side is no longer something that I can consume without thinking about like Dark Side of the Ring and some of the stuff that we see there. And when you know wrestlers are getting injured a lot in the company, I don't know. It just feels like it's a bad investment to give these guys a ton of money and then give them carte blanche to go out and just hurt each other. Um, Way too much bleeding in AEW too. And the reason I say that is simple. So you have, and I think I've mentioned this before, when you have wrestling matches where guys are bleeding, like Moxley comes out, he sneezes and he's bleeding all over the ring, right? That's just how Moxley is. But it definitely makes it look like, okay, so these guys are trying harder than the other guys, and it takes you out of the moment with some of the other matches. So you can tell these guys are bleeding in some cases too, because they're bleeding way too much for what just happened. And so again, for me, it kind of takes me out of the moment. I'm like, okay, so that's kind of gross. I don't really necessarily think that I need that. I think part of it is there's been so many years now of wrestling where there's been some great matches where nobody's needed to get color, where that hasn't been a thing. And now when you see certain matches where guys have color, especially right away, right off the opening bell, well, now you've taken something that could make the fans kind of nervous 20 minutes into a match, and you've got it there immediately off the start of the match. So now you have to elevate next, 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 and then they're doing something dumb with staple guns and things of that nature, which just I don't need to see that. It's not really my kind of thing. But at any rate, I wanted to talk about wrestling today. I may talk about the challenge too this week. The challenge actually did something that I think was a great move this week. It was a good PR move, to be honest, because I was on the fence about whether or not I was going to continue watching this season. So they actually went with full transparency, which is unusual for a reality show, but they did that, and I think even though they said they'll likely never do it again, I don't think there's a problem with it. I think it's a good idea. I think that it could go a long way towards making people who've been eliminated from the show feel like, okay, so that was legitimate and everything was fine, everything was above board. And for the fans to go, okay, so yeah, that was just, there was a result, there was an elimination, and there was some debate about whether or not the rules were followed or if production wanted one person out, and therefore they kind of weighed the scales in favor of that person. But they made sure that those people in question saw that that wasn't the case. Anyways, so I may do a video on that later on in the week. I haven't decided as of yet. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below regarding the state of wrestling. And if you're an AEW fan, great. I have no problem with that. It's not for me. It's just not for me. I just don't find it. I don't find it must watch TV. I was over an hour in and I was like, eh. Like Jericho comes in this brand new car and I was like, okay, so that car is going to get destroyed before the night's over. I don't care. I've seen so many cars destroyed in my 30 plus years watching wrestling. I don't really care. And I only say 30 plus because back in the 80s, I don't remember any cars being destroyed. I remember our collective brains being destroyed by the gobbledygooker, but that's a whole different kind of destruction. At any rate, there you go. But let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. And I have had a lot of people questioning, so am I going to go to Survivor Series? I can't. A, it's a very busy night in the National Hockey League, and B, the tickets are ridiculously expensive. I cannot justify spending hundreds of dollars to go to Survivor Series, skip hockey games. It just doesn't work. I can't do it. So I won't be going to Survivor Series, and I wouldn't spend that kind of money on wrestling tickets. I'm not gonna do it. It's like the last time AEW was here, I could have gone and seen Dynamite, but the ticket prices were just too high. It was like $150, something like that, for the same seats that I'd had for SmackDown, a televised SmackDown, for less money. So right away I was like, yeah, I'm not doing that. But anyways, there you go. Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't already done so. Thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.